Infrastructure is easy to announce. Delivery is what matters. For years, Nigeria and other countries have built projects, but the real question is what actually works and what lasts. Programs like NIAF, the Nigerian Infrastructure Advisory Facility, have focused on something very different, not just projects, but systems and capacity behind them. Today's guest is a friend and a brother, Nicholas Coleman, who has been at the center of that work. So today, we're connecting the dots between infrastructure and execution. I am Emeka Opara, and welcome back to Connecting the Dots. Good day, and welcome to another episode of Connecting the Dots. I'm joined by my African brother, Nicholas Coleman. Nick, how are you?
Very well. Thanks, Emeka. It's an absolute pleasure to be here. I was very pleased to learn this is the fifth season and the ninth episode. Wow. I hadn't appreciated it was going on for that long.
Well, you've been busy trying to keep a lot of balls in the air. So thank you for joining us. I remember our first interaction, a freezing cold morning in Nottingham, 6.5 years ago when we were rebidding for the UK NIAF program. And six 6.5 years later, the program wraps up in 2 days, 3 days. What was your expectation, or what was your what? How did you view Nigeria as a country compared to then, as you now have 6 years of lived experience in it?
Yeah, good question. I mean, I hadn't spent any sort of significant time in Nigeria at that time, which was actually about 7 years
It
ago.
was actually.
7 years ago. But at that time I was just fascinated by the country. The scale of the development challenge and the potential at that time was really fascinating. And I think for many of us, before NIAF started, we were all just um, you know really keen to try and rise to that challenge. And thankfully we've been had some real success with NIAF over the last 6.5 years.
Yes, we have. And I think when I look through that NIAF journey, I look at all the different changes the market went through, and then also obviously COVID, and just the fact that the aid world has completely changed since NIAF started. So it's well done to the team to be able to get NIAF done from a very different landscape compared to what the expectations were when NIAF 2 ended.
Yeah, totally. I mean, when we came in on UK NIAF, there'd been a long break between NIAF 2 and UK NIAF, and so many of the sort of underlying assumptions of the program didn't hold anymore. And I think, as you remember, we spent a lot of time in those earlier phases of NIAF re-engaging with stakeholders and understanding what the baseline was, and in many ways had to sort of repair much of the historical relationships that previous knives had with clients given that break. And you're right, the program has faced sort of, as has Nigeria, significant headwinds over the last over the period of the program. Whether that be COVID, and in Nigeria some of the macro pressures have undoubtedly had an impact on the way we've operated. But equally, I think we've found sort of real success despite those headwinds. And I think NIAF is a real success story.
Yes, it is. And I would get into what are some of the successes, but let's close out the program first, and then we're gonna have those conversations. NIAF is structured with three components, but really two main components at the end: power and infrastructure finance.
Mm.
And I think from the point of view of power as far as what's needed, people always say build more infrastructure as a way to get more power supply and do all these things around spending funds to create a power market. But you now hear or you now see examples where infrastructure is built, but it's not really effectively used. For instance, there's two or three power plants now that are built ready to generate power into the grid, but the transmission line is not done. So one of the conversations we've been having internally is infrastructure is not the problem. Is have you seen that as part as your kind of lessons you picked up here? And what could it be? Is it planning? Is it coordination? What do you think it is?
Yeah, I just to put a slightly different sort of you view on that. I mean, I think infrastructure is a problem. There's a massive infrastructure deficit in Nigeria, and that's undeniable. Um, but yes, there are issues in certain sort of instances. There's a project selection and uh, how how projects are sort of when projects are deployed, how they're integrated into the wider ecosystem. Certainly, that there is a planning issue and a capacity issue. I mean, I think NIFE has certainly tried to address some of that. You'll be very aware of the work we've done on Nigeria's first integrated resource plan,
Mm-hmm.
essentially a least cost planning tool to provide a plan to meet Nigeria's medium-term energy needs in a manner that also speaks to Nigeria's climate commitments. Um, and I think that holistic planning is so important um, because, as you'll know, sometimes certain political projects do come up, and if there isn't an integrated approach to planning, there can be misallocation of capital.
And I think yes, you're right. Infrastructure is definitely a problem, right? There's lack of infrastructure. But I feel that investors sit around and look and say, I want to invest in this place, but they don't quite have the planning done. So all the investments, like the biggest one we talk about is Azura.
Mm.
Azura has had its challenges, not because they're not doing anything correctly, it's just because of the environment of planning and of coordination. You're South African. Do other countries have those sorts of challenges, or maybe are there ways Nigeria could think through how to deviate from this planning and coordination problem?
Yeah, I mean, I don't necessarily think sort of the the challenges Nigeria faces. Yes, there's contextual issues, right? And every context is different, and one needs to understand the contextual issues. But many of the planning and coordination challenges have crop up elsewhere in the world, and are still cropping up elsewhere in the world. South Africa has its own issues on the power front, not to the same extent as Nigeria, and yes, some of the management of load has been better in recent times in South Africa, but you'll be well aware of the load shedding that has happened there and in recent times, largely due to a sort of lack of longer term planning and investments in South Africa's sort of energy needs.
Mm-hmm. You mentioned politics as part of how infrastructures, how infrastructure projects could potentially be derailed. But I also think from a Nigerian point of view, just from a human point of view, politics is part of everywhere. So one of the aspects I think like as an engineer needs to do a better job of is making some sectors or some sectors apolitical because of the value that they drive. Is is that something that the the program, or is that something the program has done as far as looking th things as a very holistic point of view and saying this part you have to stay away because of the politics issues there?
Well, politics plays a part sort of everywhere in the
Everywhere.
world, right? You know,
We're seeing that live and direct.
it's not just Nigeria, and all over the world, politicians want to sort of cut a big sort of ribbon and announce a shiny new infrastructure program project. I think the key is just bringing stuff back to certainly on sort of new infrastructure side, the sort of real technical rigor in project selection and identification and preparation. Um, Something we've really pushed on. So that means the economic and financial analysis, environmental, social due diligence. We've really pushed the UK's 5 case model in all the work we've done on UK and IF and the transactions we've supported, both on our side in terms of project prep as well as the capacity building we've done with some of our agencies. So on the one hand, it's just about sort of that technical rigor in approach and making sure it's backed by sort of underlying fundamentals. Um, Equally, it's about strengthening the institutions as well. So there's a real sort of, as you say, apolitical approach in how infrastructure is decisions are managed. And as you'll know, we've done a lot of work on that in UK and IF. Where you want to get to is where the sort of the big projects that politicians are championing are the ones that lead to sort of the greatest sort of economic benefits for the population.
Mm.
Um,
Yeah, no, I remember the painstaking work the infrastructure finance team did with project identification and really ensuring that the projects that they selected went through rigor. And I think that's really the approach. You can't just pick projects based on, oh, this big man is from here, or this those will help me get elected. That's we don't have that fortune given the social economic pressures. So going over to the energy side, one of the reasons I'm so interested in the power sector is that I believe that without adequate, reliable, and sustainable power, this country cannot grow. And given the context that in the next 20, when people say 2050, we think it's forever away, 25 years away, where we will be the third most populous country in the world. So if you don't have adequate power supply, that's chaos. It's a disaster waiting to happen. The power shortcomings are clear. Some things are in place, but I still think power is the missing ingredients to really get this economy going. Do you agree?
yeah, and I think it's certainly a vital ingredient. I think there's probably quite a few ingredients that are needed. Um, you know, Nigeria has faced significant headwinds recently, whether that be, rampant inflation, FX volatility, um, and all of that is kind of, alongside sort of some sluggish growth. Um, I'm I'm quite bullish on Nigeria. I think,
We all are.
yeah. I think the current administration has taken some, don't get me wrong, painful but
This is right.
much needed reforms, whether that's the FX unification, removal of the fuel subsidy, and we're seeing the country move into a much more stable environment. Now, stability is not enough, right? We now need to sort of move from stability to growth. And infrastructure is certainly one aspect of that, and a really important aspect. Infrastructure can be a real catalyst for productive growth. I think there's other elements that sort of also need to be addressed. Lowering transaction costs for doing business, um, improving conditions for export and import. But certainly there's a sort of opportunity, given where we are on the stabilization front, for infrastructure to play a big role in economic growth.
Yeah. And I think economic growth is obviously one of the things we've missed out in Nigeria. I think we're growing at 2 or 3 percentage points. 10, 15 years ago, we were growing at double digits over not from one year, was over a series of years. And that really started the boom that Nigeria experienced between the end of the late 2010 and then going from there. So with that growth in mind and with that sort of push in mind, I look back and I see the issues the power sector is currently having now with we haven't had less than 2,000 megawatts of power on the grid in almost 15 years. So I seem to think that our issues still really boil down to not having adequate supply. And I must commend the program for all the work that you've done on the power sector and really try to reform the sector. Just want to ask you a quick question on the LRP. I know it was painstaking work, but the product that's out there now will help TCN and I'm sorry, will help NISO plan better. That's accurate, right?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think it does a few things. It provides a sort of blueprint to a number of sort of central key agencies in the sector on the planning front. Whether that's the NISO, the independent systems operator, also sort of the regulator. But I think what it also does is it brings sort of a level of certainty to the market and provides some guidance to those wanting to invest in the market as to sort of what sort of generation Nigeria is heading towards, where there's opportunity for further expansion. So it's, I think, as you will be aware, you were heavily involved in the IRP. I think that sort of holistic plan has been, severely missing.
Mhm. Yes, and just drilling down further, I was obviously very involved with the power components. I'm going to talk a little bit more about that, but not too detailed because I know you were kind of overall involved across the program. I think the work that IRP did, and I think our audience probably don't know what an IRP is, so let me take a stab at it. It's an integrated resource plan, and it's a plan that allows all the different stakeholders to have one hymn book essentially. NIAF has done a lot of work at the state level. They were probably led that charge, but that's obviously comes from support from FCDO. Yeah. How's that process like to get FCDO to allow NIAF to work at subnational level?
Yeah, I mean, I think the first thing to say is with FCDO and Tetra Tech very much take a partnership approach to programming. So any big strategic program decisions are very much taken together with FCDO. Look, fundamentally, we saw real opportunity through the devolution of state electricity markets, and I think in many ways we've been vindicated. We can get into some of that later. But must really commend FCDO as well, who played a sort of leading role alongside the program in shaping the donor market's response to state electricity markets. think there was a little bit of a hesitation amongst the donor market when the Electricity Act of 2023 came out. Um, but we saw it as a real opportunity. And I think, there's a real agility within FCDO that allowed us to, alongside our federal level support, lean into what we saw as a window of opportunity at a state level. And as you know, the progress has been sort of really, really fantastic. And I'm not just talking about the architecture that has been set up at state level, whether that be legislation or policies
Hmm.
or institutions that have been formed, but we're seeing new generation projects being licensed, and those are real wins that will lead to increase power supply and increase access. So um, yeah.
Yeah, no, there are definitely risks, and a lot of those risks could be mitigated with planning and also with just identifying them on the front end. But one of the risks and one of the things I've seen the program do is building capacity at the state level. So you're not just coming, doing a policy and kind of go on away. What's that? What what informs that process for the program to build capacity at that level?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's a really sort of important part of our approach. So, in many cases, we're trying to either push forward a specific policy or legislation, or in the case of infrastructure finance, a specific transaction. And while that work has immediate value through the uh, bottlenecks that it resolves, or new infrastructure it catalyzes. The longer term value is in the capacity we leave behind, and the ability of our beneficiary clients to take forward that work after we close.
Yes, because I think one of the aspects that I really enjoyed on the program is building the capacity and ensuring that what you've done is sustainable. So, for instance, we were in Enugu early in the week, and in Enugu, because of the training that the team did, they're still using a service-based tariff model to look to see all the different feeders that Enugu main power has and really understand our supply and ensuring that they're keeping up to their bands, their tariff bands. So that's really good to know. Maybe just a last question around climate. Remember when the program started, there was this heavy push around climate. And that's when we did the energy transition plan, and they said no gas, but then we came back to gas as a transition fuel. Where do you see this conversation going, especially given what's currently happening now in the Middle East?
Yeah, look, I mean, uh, there's clearly a significant climate challenge that both the world and Nigeria needs to rise to. Um, Insofar as it sort of relates to Nigeria and the power sector, um, look, I'm a pragmatist. Uh, um, I understand that there's a sort of really large uh, population in Nigeria that needs access to affordable energy now. Um, but equally, I sort of don't think they're huge trade-offs, particularly in terms of future generation, as we see the cost of renewables come down, between climate and meeting sort of energy needs. Sure, you can talk about some of the management
Mhm.
of renewables and the complexities there, but those are technical and engineering challenges that can quite easily be solved. Um, so I'm a pragmatist for today, but certainly kind of uh, um, I'm very supportive of an energy transition, but that energy transition needs to be owned and
by the
defined
country.
locally.
Yeah.
Um, I don't think there's any use in sort of targets that are set elsewhere, which aren't sort of achievable. So a locally owned energy transition plan, which is credible and realistic. I think in many ways the work we've done, whether that be on the National Integrated Electricity Policy or the Integrated Resource Plan, get us there.
Mhm. I even forgot about the policy, about all the work that was done to get the policy sorted, and now I'm doing the strategic implementation plan as well. So those are real big achievements that the program went through. We talked about capacity earlier as an important component of the sector, especially as it relates to the power markets at a state level. But there's also this conversation around capital, like being able to figure out where to put capital in. And there's this almost chicken and egg approach of which one's more important. Is it capital or capacity? What are your thoughts?
I think it's very much capacity one. Um, Look, Nigeria, as I spoke about earlier, has a massive sort of, billions infrastructure gap. Um, but I think the immediate bottleneck is capacity. Um, I think we see real interest from number of players, whether that's DFIs, pension funds, domestic, international capital markets in deploying capital to infrastructure projects. But the problem is that sort of there aren't infrastructure projects that are structured in a way that meets the requirements of capitals. And in order to do that, you need the right capacity. So are you identifying the right projects? Are the projects structured in the correct way? Is risk allocated in the correct way? What are the underlying fundamentals? So look, the infrastructure gap is so big that there will be a capital issue if you're trying to service it in full. But I think the immediate bottleneck is on capacity and that pipeline of projects. I mean, in terms of financing, sort of as a whole, where I do think there is an issue and one that affects sort of um, credit terms is on perceived risk versus actual risk, and that's not just Nigeria. I think that's across sort of a lot of emerging and frontier economies. Um, so I certainly think there's work to do in terms of trying to get better at articulating sort of actual risk, because where there's that disconnect, lending terms can be unfavorable, which of course sort of impacts project financing terms.
Yes, for sure. And I must commend Tetra Tech on a couple of different fronts, but mostly around the intentional effort to build capacity. Not even at the government agencies was great, but from a consultant point of view, you would agree that if you look at your comms from NIAF 1, 2, and 3 on UK NIAF, there was a deliberate effort to bring more Nigerians in and build their capacity, because once the program ends, these guys are going to be here and they'll be able to keep the work going.
Mm.
What I guess was that a deliberate attempt or just kind of happened that way?
Yeah, look, absolutely. I mean, Tetra Tech have been um, heavily invested in Nigeria for over 20 years. So, we have a deep sort of investment here and a long legacy of programmings and many of the lessons we've learned in terms of how to successfully deliver. Well, one of the many lessons we've learned in terms of how to successfully implement development programs is that you have to be credible, and that credibility comes from a few things. One, yes, there needs to be really strong technical basis for how you operate. Um, but equally, your solutions need to be grounded in the local context, and be very aware of that. That the best technical solutions in the world won't be implemented and will fail unless they are sequenced in the right way, positioned to the right people or agencies, and tailored to meet the needs of the Nigerian population. And those sorts of decisions are more often than not best made by those in country.
Yeah. And just from a corporate point of view, I think next year has enjoyed the partnership with Tetra Tech because I think there's been a deliberate approach to really bring us on and really focus on what happens when the program ends. But I can say through NIAF, we probably have brought on 50, 60 consultants, and they've done really good work. And thankfully, most of them are here, and they're going to keep keep that knowledge in country as opposed to taking it out. So it's almost like an approach of ensuring that conversations that we have on the program and lessons that are learned are kept here. So thank you, Nick, for all the efforts you've made. 7 years later, any last words?
No, I mean it's been a real pleasure working with Nexter on UK Knife, and a sort of real partnership
And
approach,
spring.
and Spring. Although I think the focus of today is very much UK Knife. UK Knife has been a really large program that has taken real sort of solid contributions from many. I think I was looking at the numbers the other day, and we've had more than 300 people working on the programs. It really has been a large effort, and it's been an absolute pleasure to work with you and the Next Year team at Mecca. So thank you.